بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear respected viewers. Inshallah, today we will be completing the invalidators of Salat. We mentioned that we'll be listing about 30 of these invalidators of the Salat. If any of them occur during the Salat, then the Salat must be repeated. We covered about half of these invalidators. We reached number 17. If the sun rises during Fajr. 18. If the sun traverses its zenith during Eid Salat. 19. If the time of Asr Salat enters during the Friday prayer, during Salat Al-Jum'ah. So if the sun rises during Fajr Salat, then the Salat is invalid. If a person had already sat the last sitting in the second rak'ah, the duration of the tashahhud, the amount of time it takes to say the tashahhud, then that person has fulfilled the final pillar of Salat. If after that amount of time the sun rises, the Salat is invalidated, but it is still valid. The Salat is still valid in this case because the person has fulfilled the obligations, the pillars of the Salat. So that Salat does not need to be repeated. 18, we said if the sun traverses its zenith during the Eid Salat. So from the conditions of Eid Salat is that it's performed within its time. And the time of Eid Salat ends when the time of Dhuhr enters. And the time of Dhuhr enters when the sun traverses its zenith. And 19 we said was if the time of Asr Salat enters during Salat Al-Jum'ah. So also of the conditions of Salat Al-Jum'ah is that it is performed within its time, between the time of Dhuhr till just before the time of Asr Salat. So if a congregation was praying Salat Al-Jum'ah and they delayed it a lot such that a part of Salat Al-Jum'ah was performed in the time of Salat Al-Asr, then that Jum'ah Salat is invalid and they must repeat that Salat, but they will repeat it as a Dhuhr make-up prayer. So Qada of Dhuhr will have to be performed. 20, if the person praying was in the state of tayammum, dry ablution, then during Salat he finds water and is able to use it. So he is in a situation where he wasn't able to use the water, he performed tayammum, he began the prayer, then during the prayer he found water, or he saw water and it was sufficient enough water for him to use for wudu, and he's able to use it. In that case, that Salat is invalidated. He must now use that water, perform his wudu, and repeat that Salat. As opposed to obviously finding the water after he had completed that Salat that he performed with tayammum, then the Salat is valid and he does not need to repeat the Salat. 21, if the person praying, if a person's wudu breaks during Salat, either intentionally by his own doing or by someone else's doing. If a person's wudu breaks during Salat, either intentionally by his own doing or by someone else's doing. So the exception to this is if he unintentionally breaks his wudu, he may perform wudu and continue his Salat. For example, intentionally breaking the wudu is laughing aloud, laughing out loud in Salat. That invalidates the Salat and also invalidates the wudu. So the wudu is invalidated, therefore also the Salat is invalid. or by somebody else's doing. For example, somebody throws a rock, or a rock, somebody throws a rock or nudges a rock, it falls onto that person that is praying and he starts bleeding. So in this case, the wudu was invalidated by somebody else's doing. In either case, one's own doing or somebody else's doing, the wudu is invalid. The salat is therefore invalidated. The only exception is if it is sabqul hadath, if it is unintentional. Somebody unintentionally breaks their wudu. In that case, we mentioned last week that that salat can be salvaged by renewing the wudu, immediately leaving the salat, renewing the wudu without speaking, and then returning immediately and continuing where you left off. There are a few additional conditions, and it is a detailed matter, and it is therefore preferable to just renew the salat altogether. Number 22, if a person extends the hamza, the first letter of Allahu Akbar, the hamza in the word Allah and the hamza in the word Akbar. If these hamzas are stretched, then the salat is invalidated. So if a person says Allahu Akbar or Allahu Akbar, if any of these hamzas are stretched, when saying Allahu Akbar, the takbirat at-tahrim, saying the takbirat to enter in the salat, into the salat, we said that a person has not begun the salat. If he made this type of major error while saying the takbirah. So what we are talking about here is the instance where a person has said Allahu Akbar, he has begun the prayer, then when saying the takbir for the transition between the movements of salat, he says or she says Allahu Akbar to enter into ruku', for example. But instead of saying Allahu Akbar, a person says Allahu Akbar and stretches that first letter. It is now an istifham. You are asking a question. So it is as if a person has spoken in the salat and it invalidates the salat. And of course, the scholars always mention in this science of fiqh, they always warn against being obsessive and compulsive. They warn against wiswas, satanic whisperings. So sometimes when a person tries too hard to say the takbir correctly, that ends up wrecking it. Allahu Akbar. So sometimes trying too hard ruins the word. A man once went to the Shaykh and he's complaining about this problem to the Shaykh. That's whenever I try to say Allahu Akbar during the salat for the takbir or during the transitions between the movements, I feel I'm not saying it properly. The Shaykh said to him, repeat how you just said it now. How did you say the takbir to me right now? He said Allahu Akbar. He said that's how you should be saying it during the salat. So we learn this mas'ala, but we don't push it to the extremes because sometimes that is going to be the cause to ruin the way it is being pronounced. 23. If a person recites Quran from the Mus'haf, a copy of the Quran, or from any other source, if a person reads the Quran, it invalidates the salat. So according to Imam Abu Hanifa held that the position that if the Imam recites Quran from the Mus'haf, his prayer is invalid. The two jurists, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, maintained that the prayer remains intact because reciting from the Mus'haf is a form of worship. But as we can see, the fatwa is that the salat is invalid, except in the situation where he is a hafiz of this ayah. So that verse that he was reading from the Mus'haf or from that was written on the wall in front of him, he is a hafiz of that ayah, the salat is not invalidated, because the legal reasoning behind the invalidation of the salat is that if a person has not memorized it and he's reading this verse from a source, then this is an action which is foreign to salat, that is taking place within the salat. And this action is ta'allum. A person is learning, there's teaching and learning. He's learning from that source. And that is foreign to the actions of salat. But if he has memorized that verse and he reads it, then that does not invalidate the salat. Or if he recites it without holding the mushaf. So if he reads it, reads that which is memorized, or he reads that verse that he has memorized without carrying the mushaf, then that does not invalidate the salat. If he's carrying the mushaf, then the problem here is that there is amal kathir. It is an excessive motion that we spoke about that invalidates the salat. So carrying the mushaf, looking into the mushaf, turning the pages of the mushaf, this is considered as amal kathir, excessive actions in the salat, and it therefore invalidates the salat. Number 24, if a person performs a pillar of salah while asleep and does not repeat that pillar after waking up. For example, a person sat for the last rak'ah, last cycle of the salat, and we have a pillar here which is the last sitting for the duration of the tashahhud, the amount of time that it takes to recite the tashahhud. That is the last pillar which must be fulfilled. But this person was so tired, as soon as he sat up from that second sujood, for that final sitting, he fell asleep. He dozed off in the salat, and he remained there for a minute or two, and then he woke up immediately, and immediately after waking up, he gave salam. So because he performed a pillar, in this case was the final sitting, whilst in a state of being asleep, the salat is invalid. Instead, he was supposed to sit in a wakeful state for the length of tashahhud before giving the salam for the salat to be valid. And we've mentioned before, when we spoke about the nullifiers of wudu, that sleeping in salat does not invalidate the wudu if he falls asleep while standing. Of course, he wakes up before falling onto the ground and being asleep whilst on the ground, like a micro sleep while standing. That does not invalidate the wudu. Or falls asleep in the sitting position and he remains in the sitting position, or whilst in ruku' or in sujood and he remains in the sunnah salat position. So his elbows are off the floor, his elbows are far from his sides, his stomach is off his thighs. So if a person falls asleep and he remains in this state, then it is evidence that it was a micro sleep. He didn't enter a state of full relaxation where it was a total sleep. Otherwise, the wudu will be invalid and the salat is also invalid. Number 25, if the person praying is a sahib tartib, someone who is required to perform his missed prayers in order. That is the meaning of sahib tartib. This person is someone who is required to perform his missed prayers in order, and during salat remembers that there is a missed prayer which he has not yet made up. He missed salat al-fajr, for example, and when he was performing salat al-dhuhr, he remembered that he still hasn't prayed salat al-fajr. So now salat al-dhuhr, he remembered during the salat, this salat is invalidated and he must perform the fajr and then afterwards pray salat al-dhuhr. Afterwards he must pray salat al-dhuhr. There are a few exceptions and cases where it is not a condition to make up the missed prayers in order. And we said that is the case if he is not sahib tartib. So he's not a sahib tartib if he has many missed prayers that he needs to make up. Once it reaches 6 prayers, now he's no longer sahib tartib. He can make up those 6 prayers at any times. But anywhere from 1 to 5 prayers, he must make them up in order before he prays the present salat that he needs to pray. 26. If during the salat the imam is replaced with someone not eligible for the position of imam. During the prayer, the imam is replaced. So in this case, this is an example of sabq al-hadath. The imam accidentally invalidated his wudu. In this case, he drags a person behind him to the mihrab, or he indicates to the person to move to the mihrab, or if the jama'ah sees that the imam has left to renew his wudu, somebody steps forward. But if the one who stepped forward is someone who is not eligible for the position of imam, then the salat is invalid. Such as a child, for example. In the Hanafi school, someone who's not baligh, he cannot lead the salat, whether it's fard or nafil, the salat is invalid. Or someone who does not know how to recite Quran. He's a new Muslim, he still doesn't know how to recite Quran, and that person was chosen by the imam to step forward. If he steps forward and assumes the position of imam, the salat is invalid. 27. If a person exits the mosque believing that his wudu was nullified, or he passes the rows of people praying, or crosses his sutra when not in a mosque. So an example of this, water may have run from one's nose, but he believed it was blood. Water ran from his nose, but he believed it was blood. And as a result, this person left the mosque to go and do bina, to salvage the salat and continue where he left off from. If this occurs, if he leaves the mosque, when he was in the mosque, he leaves it, one is not permitted to continue the prayer. Now he must restart the salat from the beginning, not from where he left off. His salat is invalidated and he must restart the salat. If, however, one did not leave the mosque, this person, thinking that his wudu was broken, he was leaving, but he did not reach the exit of the mosque, he is to complete what remains of the prayer. He just walks back to the saf, to the row, and continues his prayer. As for the person who is not in the mosque, so a person in the same situation, it was water ran from his nose, he thought that it was blood, he wasn't praying in the masjid. We said this person, if he leaves, he turns around and leaves from behind, as soon as he passes the rows, now the salat is invalidated. He cannot just step back into the rows and continue the salat. If he leaves from the left, when he passes the rows to the left, or he leaves to the right, when he passes the rows to the right, now he has walked too far, he cannot continue where he left off. He needs to begin the salat from the start. Or if a person, we said, is not in the mosque, the same situation, but he passes the sutra, that object that has placed at the position of sujood to stop people from walking in front of him, that barrier that is placed there. If he walks forward, thinking that his wudu is broken, going to renew his wudu, once he passes that sutra, then the salat is invalid and he cannot continue where he left off. He must begin the salat from the start. Number 28. If a person laughs audibly during the salat, if a person laughs, dhahik, audibly during the salat. So we mentioned in the nullifiers of wudu, if a person is praying and he smiles. A smile, and the teeth become visible, there is no sound, the salat is not invalidated, neither is the wudu invalidated. If a person ضحك, so he laughs, but it is a sound, that laugh produces a sound which is just enough for him to hear himself. He can only hear that sound. Then the salat is invalidated, but the wudu is still intact. So he needs to just renew, he needs to restart that prayer without having to renew his wudu. The third case is the qahqaha. If a person laughs aloud, such that those around him, all of those people around him can hear and they heard his laugh, then this is a qahqaha. This invalidates the salat, and also the wudu is invalidated. He must renew his wudu and restart the salat. Number 29, if a person removes one or both of his khuf, the leather socks or the foot gear, during salat, whether taken off with minimal movement or excessive movement. Number 30, if a person praying behind an imam precedes the imam by performing an entire pillar, such that he is not with the imam in that pillar for even a moment. He's praying behind the imam is still in qiyam, standing position. That person, for example, the pillar of ruku', the person praying following the imam enters ruku' and then leaves the ruku'. Not for a moment did he share that pillar with the imam. Then afterwards the imam did the ruku', and the person continued and completed the salam without even doing the ruku' again. So if he had done ruku' again, then the salat is valid. But in this case, the follower did ruku', came out of ruku', then the imam entered ruku', came out of ruku', and the follower then proceeded following the imam for the rest of the salat, then gave salam. That salat is invalid. The salat of the follower is invalid. He must repeat the salat. If he gave salam, he cannot salvage that salat. He must repeat the salat after giving salam. So doing ruku' or sujood or beginning a pillar or an act before the imam, going ahead of the imam, that is makruh tahriman. It is prohibitively disliked. But this is the only case where it will invalidate the salat. The case where he does not join the imam for even a moment in that pillar. Finally, we'll mention 4 things which are further clarification of this topic, and they are those things which do not invalidate the salat. A person might think that these things invalidate the salat because they are similar to some examples that we have mentioned, but in reality, they do not invalidate the salat. So the following do not nullify the prayer. But we'll see some examples, even though they don't nullify the salat, they still remain makruh, disliked actions. Number 1, if a person absent-mindedly utters the salam in order to end the salat. Absent-mindedly, sahwan, nasiyan, he utters the salam in order to end the salat. So this does not invalidate the salat. He thought that it was the final rak'ah, but in reality it was not. So for example, he is praying 4 rak'at, any 4 rak'at salat, he's praying it. But he gave salam after the second rak'ah. He gave salam after the second rak'ah, thinking that this is the 4th rak'ah, thinking that he is in the 4th rak'ah. So he's praying dhuhr, and when he was reached the second rak'ah, he thought that this is the 4th rak'ah of dhuhr, so he gave salam. The salat is not invalidated. Instead, he stands up and completes his prayer, the third and fourth rak'ah, and here he will do sajdat sahu for delaying the standing after the tashahhud of the second rak'ah. As opposed to the one who gives salam intentionally, decisively, he gives the salam before its correct time. For example, a person who gives salam thinking that it is at-tarawih, but in reality it is Salat al-Isha, for example. This salat is invalid. He cannot salvage this prayer. He cannot just get up and repeat and complete the remaining 2 rak'at. He must repeat that salat. So for example, in Ramadan, the Imam is used to praying Salat al-Isha and then beginning the Taraweeh, 2 rak'at, 2 rak'at, 2 rak'at. But on one occasion, it comes the time of Ramadan, he's used to praying the Isha and the Taraweeh. But here, during Salat al-Isha, he thought that his Taraweeh had begun. He thought they had started the Taraweeh. So after the second rak'ah, he's thinking he's already started the Taraweeh, and he gives salam decisively, intentionally giving the salam, thinking that it is Salat at-Taraweeh, but in reality it is Salat al-Isha. In reality it is Salat al-Isha. So in this case, this is different to the first case that we mentioned. In this case, the salat is invalidated and he must repeat the salat. Number 2, if someone walks by the spot where the one praying makes prostration, even though the one who crosses has committed a sin. So if you were praying and somebody crosses in front of you, man, woman, child, grown up, animal, whatever it may be, crosses in front of you, your salat is not invalidated, even if it is within the place where you make sujood, directly in front of you. As for the one who is crossing in front of the person praying, we said that person has committed a sin. He is athim. If it is someone mukallaf, someone who's legally accountable, someone who's baligh, the Muslim who has reached the age of bulugh, maturity, and he's aqil, he is sane. So it's not a child who hasn't reached the age of maturity. We cannot say that he's committed a sin. And the one who is mukallaf, legally accountable, has done it on purpose, intentionally, as opposed to a person who did not realize that he walked in front of you. He's obviously done something wrong, but he has not committed a sin. He's not accountable for that. So this is something that we need to be careful of, especially if you're praying in the first row and immediately after completing your salat you wish to leave or go to the back of the masjid. There's always some latecomers who are still completing their salat. So it's a common mistake to walk in front of this person, especially the rows are close. So sometimes there's no way that you can walk in front of that person without crossing the place of that person's sujood. So that is a sin. A person must wait. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if a person knew the consequences of walking in front of a person who's in salat, then that person would rather wait 40 years than cross that person's path of or place of sujood. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us if we have ever committed this sin, and that Allah ta'ala forgives all our major and minor sins, everything that we have done intentionally or unintentionally, and every sin that we have ever committed knowingly and even unknowingly. Number 3, if a person eats something that is caught between his teeth and is less than the size of a chickpea, even though it remains makruh, and a person must make sure not to do excessive chews, to swallow that which is stuck between the teeth, even if it is small, but a person swallows it with excessive chewing, 3 consecutive chews, that's considered as a major act, non-salat act. It invalidates the salat. Finally, if a person looks at something written and understands it, even if it is Quran or other, it does not invalidate the prayer. So just looking at something and understanding it does not invalidate the prayer, because he's not actually pronounced and spoken those words which he has seen in front of him on a frame or written on the wall, even though this is khilaf al-adab. This is not from the etiquettes of salat. This is disliked because a person should be looking at the place of sujood, and more seriously, a person is distracting himself, being distracted from his salat. So it is a lack of khushu', and this is discouraged in salat. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all of our salat and to increase us in beneficial knowledge so that our salat may be valid. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.